Hello, and welcome to the very first Greywood Gardening. I'm Brian, and it's the very end of March here in Zone 4, Minnesota. That means we're just on the cusp of things starting to grow, which also means it's time to get started planting the very first seeds of the season. On this video, I'm going to build a seed starting area in my unfinished basement and then plant the very first tray of seeds of the season. But first, let's take a tour of Greywood and let me give you a little bit of background on what we're doing here. My wife and I bought this house on a wooded lot last year, and we moved in at the very end of summer, so we haven't had time to do anything outside yet. So it's our very first year gardening here. We did have about an acre of trees cleared around the house to give us some room to garden and to build our little meadow in the woodland. We have a medium-sized garden here at the top of the driveway where the driveway loops around. This is going to become a cottage garden, the idea of it always being in bloom. It'll take a couple of years to get there, but this is one of the few spaces we did some work on last year. The whole place was covered with landscape fabric and mulch that had broken down and had solid grass and weeds growing up through the landscape fabric and mulch. We got all of that cleared out, we had a good layer of compost put on, and then we even got a couple of spring bulbs and some bare root plants in. So we'll see how that does, and we have a lot more to plant here this year. And moving directly west from the cottage garden is the area that will become our veggie garden. It's a hillside that was leveled when the trees were removed, and right now you can see the quality of our soil once you get past the first couple of inches is really nothing but pure sand. We have a lot of deer on the property. They're coming through almost every single morning, so we're going to have to build a deer fence around the entire veggie garden area in order to safely grow anything here. That fence will need to be about 8 feet high. The entire veggie garden area that is going to be growable once the fence is in will be about 5,000 square feet, so plenty of room to grow a lot of food for one family. Moving down from the veggie garden area, directly across from the cottage garden, is an area that is going to one day become a small orchard. This is not on our plans to do for this year. There's also concerns with the deer and planting young fruit trees, and do we need to fence the entire area in, or can we just fence off trees individually? But all of that is a problem for future us. Directly in front of the house is this area of tiered landscaping right underneath this truly huge river birch tree. I managed last fall to get just one of these areas cleared and prepped with some compost, so we're not sure what we're going to do here, but this will probably get planted up. In addition, I dug up a big patch of ground right in front of it along the driveway where I planted about 250 tulip bulbs, so that should be a really nice display in about a month or so. By far the largest area that we have is a very big clearing that we're just calling the yard. In the long term, this is all going to become garden space except for a small area of lawn. But for this year, we're just going to be putting down wildflower seed and turn it into a big wildflower meadow. As you can see, we have our work cut out for us, but we also have all the years we want to make it happen. So the first thing to do is plant some seeds, but before we can do that, we need a place to start them. Let's get started. So this little corner of our unfinished basement is going to be the seed starting area. In fact, probably just right back there. But before I can start any seeds, I have to build a bench to start the seeds on. So I decided to build a bench, partially because I can make it the exact height and dimensions I want, and also partially because even the cheapest fold-up table I could find is a lot more expensive than just buying some 2x4s and building it yourself. So let's get started.
Oh.
All right, and the growing bench is complete. The project was not too bad. Took maybe 2 or 3 hours to knock it together. Definitely now that I'm done, I probably would have done a couple things a little differently, but it's going to hold up plants at a convenient height, so it's good to go. The one thing that does need to be done before the project is complete is we need some sort of waterproofing on this surface. One option would be to paint it like a couple coats of like an exterior paint. What I think I'm going to do is actually put this plastic sheeting up. We have a bunch of this to try to contain the sawdust, not for murdering people, which is what it looks like, but I can just cut a piece of that to the right size, staple it around to the front, and then we'll be ready to start planting. Okay, the grow area is now complete. The bench is done and ready to go. I have unpacked all of our seed starting supplies. I have those on a shelf here, as well as loaded up underneath of the bench, including a box full of seeds. I have the grow lights hanging up over it, and I even managed to run a hose coming down from the basement sink so that I have water right here at the bench. All right, well, the only thing to do now is to start planting seeds. Today, I'm going to be starting some pepper seeds. Peppers are something that, at least in Zone 4, we really don't want to plant outside until around June. You want to be growing them inside for around 8 weeks before planting them out. It's the very, very end of March now. It's the perfect time for me to get pepper seeds started. Now, there are 4 things that you need to start seeds. Number 1 is you need some kind of growing medium. I'm using a seed starting mix from Johnny Seeds. You can use anything that calls itself a seed starting mix or any kind of potting soil at all. They'll all work just fine. Do not use dirt from the yard, compost, or topsoil. Those are not going to work. Second thing you need is some kind of appropriately sized container that has holes in the bottom to allow water to drain out. The third thing you're going to need is some kind of lights. A bright sunny windowsill is not good enough. If you're in any kind of northern climate, we just do not have enough light at this time of year to start your seeds in a windowsill. You need lights. You don't have to have big fancy grow lights. In fact, I used to just use a couple of these super simple T5 fluorescents that I hung on the underside of a shelf, and 2 of these over a seed starting tray will grow them just fine. The 4th thing you'll need probably is some sort of heat source. So I have like a little germination heating mat. You only need this to warm up the soil in your trays until the seeds sprout. Once the seeds are sprouted, you don't need it anymore. And you only need it if your temperature is relatively cool. A couple years ago, I was starting seeds in the boiler room, the furnace room of a house that was 85 degrees in that room all winter long. I didn't need any kind of heating mats. In fact, to start lettuce and spinach, I actually had to germinate them in a different room of the house because the boiler room was too hot for them to germinate. So that's all the stuff that you need. There's, of course, a few other things that are handy to have. First of which is I do have this tray that I'm putting my trays into. And the purpose of this is when I water it and water drains out, it gets caught in here rather than running all over the place. And of course, some kind of label to label what your seedlings are. I prefer to order just big giant bags of popsicle sticks and just write my labels on the popsicle sticks. It has the advantage of it's dirt cheap and you're not using plastic. And they work really, really well. They stick in, they're a perfect size. So I am planting a few different things in here. I'm going to be putting in 6 jalapenos, 6 cayenne peppers, and then these other 24 I'm going to use for the first half of my bell peppers. So I'll do a mix of red, yellow, and orange. So let's get that written down. All right, and now it is time to start making a mess. We are going to fill this up with our seed starting mix. The next thing I like to do before planting anything is to first water your seed starting medium. Next, I want to plant basically 2 seeds in each of these compartments. And then when they sprout, I'm going to cut down whichever is the smallest, so I'll only have 1 plant per. I have 2 seeds just in case one of them doesn't sprout. A great way to do it is to actually just make a couple little indents with the back of a pencil. And you'll put the seed in these little holes. The nice thing about doing this is you're slightly compacting the growing medium. So you're creating a nice surface for the seed to rest against. All right, we are going to start with the jalapenos. So I'm just putting 1 seed into each of the holes. All right, now that all the seeds are in, we can just grab a little bit of this potting soil, sprinkle it over to cover the seeds up. All right, now you just want to gently firm the dirt down. You can do it with your fingers, but I'm actually just going to use a spare tray. Last thing to do now that it's firmed down is just give it a little water. Because we watered it before, there's no danger of the potting medium lifting up and floating the seeds away. So next up is we just set it on our heating pad, plug in the heating pad. At this stage, you don't even need lights. You don't need any lights on. This can be sitting in darkness until the seedlings first pop up out of the soil. Then they're going to need lights for about 16 hours a day. Now, the one other thing that you can do to make life a little bit easier is put some sort of plastic dome over this. This is a typical dome that you would get from, just any garden center or hardware store. Set that over. Doesn't need to be airtight. You're just trying to capture the moisture as it evaporates to keep it in there, to keep the soil moist, so that you don't have to water it as often. If you don't have one of these, it's not a big deal. You're probably just going to need to water every day, or if you're in a very dry space, maybe even twice a day. All right, now we just have to wait for these to germinate. One other important safety tip I just thought of. In my basement, I know we occasionally get mice. And something I have learned the hard way is the second these seedlings sprout, mice will happily just eat off every single one and wipe out your entire starter. So if, like me, you're starting in a garage or a basement that sometimes gets mice, it is absolutely worth just getting a little mouse trap, letting it sit down right next to your seedlings, a little peanut butter on there. Mice will always go for this over this. Now we're ready to wait to germinate. Hey, I wanted to show you guys something super exciting I just saw while walking around outside. It's the very first flower of the year. I planted about 100 crocus bulbs last year all around under the apple tree. And this is the very first one to bloom, although I've seen a lot of the other ones are starting to come up. So that means a few days from now we'll probably have little crocus blossoms all over this area. And of course after that come the daffodils, and then the tulips, and then it'll really feel like spring. Well, that's all I have for you on this video. Thank you for watching and sticking through it, and I promise I will get better as we do more of these. In the meantime, happy gardening.